Welcome to the FanDuel running back analysis. I'm Jason Gilbo, JGilbo11. With me is Justin Elick at Big Italy 42. Taking a look at cash game GPPs and value running backs for this week. Overall, we got our kind of week one out of the way. Now we can kind of look at who we really want to target. And you got some good names kind of valuing across kind of really all salaries here.
Yeah, the first guy, kind of an obvious thing. We saw last week the huge game that he had, and obviously we were on him last week, and it was hard not to be. I don't think anybody assumed that he was going to end up with 140 rushing yards. What was it, 143? I think 5 or 6 catches, monster game. Obviously, it's a much worse situation for him as far as the matchup goes because the Bengals are one of the better defenses in the league, but even I, as the biggest Bengals fan on the planet, am not delusional enough to think that he's not still going to see a huge workload. It's the volume play, if nothing else, once again. And, after that huge game he had last week, his price really didn't go up very much. I think he was 71 last week. He's 76 now. So, yards per carry wise, I don't think he's going to have a huge game. I'm not expecting 4.5, 5 yards a carry. But if he touches the ball 20-plus times, still just makes for a really safe high floor option, even if he doesn't find the end zone.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And as you mentioned, that price really didn't jump all that bad. And at 500 more, it's more of a volume thing here. He's just going to get that workload yet again. And I'm not expecting that high ceiling, but I think, as you mentioned, that floor is going to be pretty safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Spencer Ware, your next guy here at 6,800, obviously coming off a monster week, and not kind of the way we all expected it to kind of go down. I don't think anyone expected really won that ceiling to begin with, but we also didn't expect him to kind of turn into Arian Foster and just go monstrous in the receiving game.
Yeah, he was, I think, the 4th leading receiver among all players last week as far as yardage goes, 129 yards. And we're talking to get more yards than Antonio Brown, who had a monster game. Obviously, he didn't score 2 touchdowns through the air, but did score 2 total touchdowns, had 199 total yards. That's the kind of thing we talked about last week. He was an obvious kind of free space for cash games. He was the guy that, in tournaments, I thought it was viable to fade him in some spots. Obviously, that didn't turn out too well in those spots for the most part. But either way, I think he's just a safe option again. Obviously, Jamal Charles is not officially out for this week yet, at least not that I've seen. I think it's Thursday now. So I don't expect him to play. I don't know why they'd force him out there if he's less than 100%. I don't think they will. And, it is a tougher matchup for him this week, obviously, based on the Texans as opposed to the Chargers. It's kind of, I wouldn't say the opposite, but the Texans, a team that an above average defense, it seems to me they're better in the passing game than against the run. But obviously we see Captain Checkdown, Alex Smith just looking his way a lot. Kendrick West didn't hardly get any work last week. So once again, just kind of by sheer volume alone, I think he makes for a really safe play. But I do think this is a spot where I probably won't play him at all in GPPs because I think he's going to be huge owned. And it really isn't a great matchup for him. He's just going to see a lot of looks and be able to, remain a safe option.
Yeah, I definitely see that too. And as you mentioned, I think GPPs I'll be looking elsewhere, especially a guy who we'll get to in a minute, who we expect to kind of get a heavy workload for a couple hundred cheaper. But transitioning into tournaments here, you talk about CJ Anderson at 7,800. I feel like that price is way too low for his matchup and what he's going to be doing this week.
Yeah, this is like, I won't say it's a gift. He's still 7,800. He's not the cheapest or anything like that. But you're looking at 4 guys priced ahead of him. It's insane to me that Ezekiel Elliott's ahead of him. No offense to Ezekiel Elliott, but Anderson coming off a game where he faced obviously one of the toughest defenses in the league. 20 carries for 92 and a touchdown, 4 receptions on 5 targets for 47 and a touchdown. And then you look at the matchup he's got this week, and it's almost not even fair against the Colts defense that was just horrible last week. And just putting it in perspective, both Theo Riddick and Amir Abdullah were top 10 running backs, even on FanDuel for half PPR, because they just absolutely destroyed the Colts in the short passing game. Obviously, game flow kind of dictated that a little bit, and you're not expecting both of those guys to have big games again. But Abdullah had 5 for 57 and a touchdown. Theo Riddick went for 5 and 63 and a touchdown. And CJ Anderson's one of the best receiving backs we have in the game and one of the more well-rounded players. An easy, obvious matchup. He's an awesome play in all formats, and he's going to be one of the first people that he's listed as a GPP play here, but that's because he's got huge upside here.
Yeah, I like him, and one of the good things is game flow doesn't really matter to him.
Yep.
He's going to run the ball a ton if they're up big. He's also going to be using the passing game if it is close. So it's kind of a safe play either way, as you mentioned, kind of all formats here. But yeah, the ceiling is what we're going to be looking at. Really a ton of upside there at 7,800. Looking at Denny Woodhead, obviously we saw him be used a ton in the second half as expected. Melvin Gordon took a back seat. We saw this last year. 6,400, pretty reasonable price as well.
Yeah, and I mean, since Darren Sproles kind of doesn't really exist anymore, and he was one of my favorite players ever because he was so versatile, and you know, when he was in San Diego, wherever he was, it didn't matter. I mean, he in Philly, he was just that short passing, like perfect player. And I think that Danny Woodhead is now just kind of the de facto short passing game extraordinaire. And the great thing about him is that I think he saw 16 carries last week also because obviously Brandon Oliver out for the season now. Keenan Allen, who obviously a wide receiver, but catches a lot of short passes as well. I mean, Woodhead had 16 carries and 7 targets, found the end zone through the air. I mean, Phil Rivers has no one to throw the ball to now. So even on a half-point PPR side, I think Woodhead's one of those guys I mentioned here, how people look on DraftKings and they say, I want the full point PPR because no one would be surprised to see Woodhead with 7, 8, 9 catches in this game. But you know, that's a reasonable price. You look at the other guys around his price there, around 6,400, and I mean, there's not a whole lot there that has a floor and upside combo. I mean, I think his floor is just tremendous this week. And Jacksonville still not a very good defense, and you know, last week he had a monster game against the defense in the Chiefs. It's much, supposed to be, at least was much better last year than Jacksonville.
Yeah, no, I definitely like Woodhead a lot. And as you mentioned, I think people need to be aware that he is still him and guys like Theo Riddick. If they're going to be used like how they're going to be used, it doesn't really matter what site. Obviously, you do like him. The scoring is going to be higher on DraftKings, but at these prices on FanDuel, it's definitely one to kind of give a look towards.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of value running backs here, you talk about Ryan Matthews, 6,300, decent matchup here against the Bears. I like this play quite a bit, and it looks like Philly's going to be giving him the ball quite a bit in week 2, from what I've read. So what do you like about him so much?
I mean, like you said, giving him the ball a lot. He had 22 carries in the first week. Obviously, that's the Browns, and you know, you kind of wish that he had produced a little bit more on that many touches against the Browns, one of the worst defenses in the league. But the Bears weren't any better. Actually, they were worse defensively last year than the Browns were. Obviously, didn't play too poorly in week 1 against the Texans, but Lamar Miller still had over 100 yards. Ryan Matthews is one of those guys that, you know, due to all the inconsistencies in Philly, rookie quarterback now, you don't really know what to expect. Obviously, it was one game and it was the Browns. So whenever you have a small sample size and it's versus the Browns, you kind of wait to see him play a real team first. But Ryan Matthews, like you said, just volume alone, he should see 20-plus touches. The Bears, you know, got to worry about Jordan Matthews, who had a big game first week. Tend to think that they're going to try to slow down the passing attack because it was much more potent in week 1. But, I mean, either way, he's going to see plenty of touches. I don't think he has huge upside, but he's a better runner than people give him credit for because, you know, last year this was a team that was just kind of a mess all the way around. And when you're behind by, you know, 2 touchdowns quite often, it's kind of hard to get your running back in a good rhythm.
Yeah, and I mean, Matthews has always been a guy who, I mean, injury plagued throughout his career. As you mentioned, was just on a bad team last year. So, given the fact that, you know, they are small favorites, reasonable total to kind of go after as well. I like him as well. And Rashad Jennings, here you talk about 6,300, same price. This one I feel is interesting because you're looking at this game. Obviously, the passing attack really jumps out at you, but I feel like you can kind of really still get exposure and kind of really go against the grain with Jennings.
Yeah, I mean, anytime anybody's facing the Saints, I didn't have much hope that they'd improve this year. Obviously, we talked about it last week with the Raiders and kind of were mocking them already, and then they kind of mocked themselves with that terrible performance week 1. So it seems like it doesn't matter if one of the Ryan brothers is coordinating this defense. They're just bad. I mean, there's not a single very good playmaker on this defense really that's going to stop anybody. And I mean, we talked about how bad the Colts defense was last week. The Saints were even worse. And I mean, the Lions are, I think, a better offense than the Raiders, at least at this point. It's marginally better. But I mean, if I'm the Saints, I'm going to try to stop Odell Beckham. and now a healthy Victor Cruz and Sterling Shepard. There's plenty of guys you got to worry about in that passing game. I mean, there's just huge holes all day long for opposing teams up front against the Saints. And I mean, you look what they did last week, and it was pretty rough. So we saw Jennings had almost 20 carries last week, and the volume is kind of what I'm looking at here, because last year had more than 18 carries only twice, but over his last 4 games last year, first game of this year, he's got almost 600 total yards. So this is a guy that, really his downside is he hasn't been scoring touchdowns. But I mean, if you get down in the red zone, I mean, I'd be throwing Odell Beckham too.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, you look at this Giants offense, it does have a ton of weapons. Are you leaning more Jennings towards GPPs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a guy who's going to be more involved in the passing game, like, Spencer Ware, something like that, gives you a higher floor. So I think Jennings is more towards GPPs. But I mean, if I like the rest of my cash game lineup, we'll get to receivers obviously later. Then I mean, I don't mind him there, because he's going to see 18 to 20 touches. It's just he's a marginal part of that passing attack, and I like to have a little bit more of a floor, especially with a guy that I'm not convinced is going to get a ton of looks at the goal line. So I think he's still more of a GPP play for me, though.
Yeah, definitely. The matchup is certainly a plus for him as well.
Yeah.
So, that's going to wrap things up with the FanDuel running back analysis. Be sure to check out dailyfantasycafe.com for all our great tools and content.